All right, so I'll get started now. So, hey, I'm Shinobi. I'm host of the Shinobi Shiller podcast. I think we're going to call it the Dojo just because it's a Japanese thing, representative of ninjas and learning and everything and all good. And I hope that listeners of this basically can learn something about the crypto, it's in the industry itself, the people working in it, and how to become better traders, whether that be on chain or beyond that. So today I've got on Pedro, who's currently on the Orderly team. He's a good friend of mine that I met at a crypto conference a couple of years back at ETC. So yeah, Pedro, thanks for coming on, man. How you doing today?
I'm good, mate. Thanks for having me.
Hell yeah. Let's just jump right into it. Like, obviously I spoke about ETC and stuff. Like, what do you feel like your thoughts are in terms of like the value of IRL connections from say like crypto conferences or meeting with fund managers, meeting with other project teams and stuff versus somewhat the echo chamber that can be crypto Twitter and general kind of like online friends and groups and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, there's definitely positives to both, right? So, the first conference I went to was where we met, and it was a real eye opener, right? Meeting people in person, of course, establishes better relationships. Um, you tend to have a better rapport with them. You see people all the time, like at these events. So you see the same people, um, and you just end up building a bigger and better relationship. Um, in terms of like internet connections, definitely good too. If you're like trading focused, don't tend to meet a lot of traders at these events. Um, Mainly like industry people who are working their 9 to 5 within Web3. They're good for alpha, good for understanding the general narratives that are being pushed. But if you're in an alpha group or you're speaking with people online, definitely really good opportunities to meet people there in terms of getting projects or research or um, just general trading advice or information.
Yeah, I feel like in my own experience, like I agree with what you say, which is that like the people at conferences tend to be the ones that actually work in the industry and less so the ones that are traders and actually the ones that like quote unquote make it, right? Because the ones who are actually trading and stuff, it's usually looking at charts and just speaking with people in real time because the fastest way to communicate with someone is literally just by messaging them over Telegram. Like IRL, there's only so much you can do in so much, so short amount of time. So I guess like we can touch on how you do this in person and how you kind of grow your network and the stream of people that you're getting your information from in person, but maybe we focus more on the online, on chain. Like, how do you go from being a retail participant to someone that's always on crypto Twitter to realizing that crypto Twitter is actually, if you get that information, you're almost too late and you need to like get into those like Telegram groups with those people. Like, you're obviously someone
Yeah,
who has connections with some of these very successful traders, like not only whether they be on your team, but just generally, right? So how do you feel like you got into these circles and like put yourself in a position where you can effectively like get information early and be lucky, almost like positioning yourself for luck in some ways?
yeah, it's definitely a balance of both, right? So meeting people IRL, obviously better relationships, and then those people tend to be in these groups, and then you get invited, right? Um, and at the same time, being in these groups um, produces a lot of alpha, right? Depending on where you're at. Um, so it's a good mix of both you need. Um, yeah.
But like, how do you feel like the IRL relationships you had, like how much do you feel like those have contributed to also getting you into better online groups and stuff? Because like that is one thing I would say, like from being conferences and interacting with like teams and stuff, like you build like a lot stronger conviction in like positions and stuff when you've met the team. Like in some ways, it's almost like a bias in itself because the team shows you and you kind of like learn to like them and that makes you like the project more. And so it becomes like harder to look at a project for what it is, if you see what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yeah. Like I'm in a few alpha groups, and they definitely tend to do better. And um, you meet people through them.
Taking from someone in person, right? Like oftentimes you meet someone in person that gets you into like the right alpha group and all that kind of stuff. But I know obviously from your experience as well, you've had the kind of like opportunity to go into also the kind of like pre-sale, early allocation and some things through, that can be through knowing the right people or just being in contact with the team and stuff. Like what's your experience of going through that route of kind of pre-sale early allocation versus like purely just like liquid investing, or like what kind of tips would you give to people that want to get exposed to that kind of investing as well?
Yeah, so it's changed a lot. The first time I started investing like pre-seed, seed round, early stage investments was like 2021, late 2020. Trawling through Telegram groups, Discords, joining like loads of like communities that I found through YouTube. Obviously, being a normie back then, and then there would be opportunities there. The first one I got into was pools. There was only like 10 spots at the time, and it did about like a 30 or 40x within like the first week of launch. So that was my first taste of really getting into pre-seed, seed round allocations. It's evolved a lot from then, from what I'm doing now. Being in alpha groups, or just having these connections within the industry now that I've worked in it for about 3 years, you get a lot more deal flow, especially being a BD. You're speaking with founders, or like core contributors to projects all the time. So probably speaking with 3 to 4 different projects every day. And they're always trying to raise, especially during a bear market. If there's any opportunities that you see just through work, then there are times where I've taken that too. So it's changed from very small tickets to very limited numbers, and it's like a really hard graph within these groups to basically getting. You definitely have to make sure that you can cut out the noise because there's a lot of shit that comes as well. Um, but it's definitely a lot easier now, and ticket sizes are growing. Uh, Vesting terms tend to be towards like raising now. They're a little bit more. Um, they're not as ideal for the investor, but last year and a half, it's been pretty easy. Projects have really been struggling with raising, so um, they tend to take tickets pretty easily.
How much capital or kind of like percentage of total portfolio do you try to think about when you're going into a private allocation like that?
So the way I split my portfolio is I have like uh 75% in long-term bags, and then I have 20%, 25% as a trading bag. And then any profit that I make from my trading account, I'll just chuck into any allocation that I think is a good opportunity, right? Um, for example, recently invested into Shopify, which I got through one of these groups that I'm in, as well as Portal. Like, if I think that something's going to be better, or has like more long term or more longevity, then I'll go pretty heavy into it. Terms also need to make sense. Like, I think anything above 12 to 18 months is pretty much a no for me. Um, but those are the things I'm looking for at the moment. Like, nice, good chunk on TGE, and then like a pretty short vesting with no cliff. Or if there is a cliff, then a super short cliff, like 3 to 5 months.
Are there any kind of like general things that you try to consider? Like I know as well from like a trading perspective, you're very you endorse a lot, kind of like going very heavily on high conviction plays, and like that's obviously not like an uncommon thing necessarily. But how do you
Mhm.
tend to like decide if something is high conviction or not?
Um, Research, a lot of research. Understanding why something is undervalued is I mean, if you have that skill, then that's how you make money in this industry, right? You need to front run the narrative. If you can figure out what's going to get pushed, is it undervalued, and you have high conviction, you can go heavy. And if there's a rotation into that narrative, then you're making a lot of money. Um, it's also a combination of working with other really smart people in the space, um, that can what's the word, validate your thesis, validate your conviction. That also helps me be more confident when investing.
How would you say you kind of tell the difference between being early and being wrong? You know, because when you don't have other people validating your thesis, you're effectively early, right? Like you can be right and you can be early, or you can be wrong. How do you tend to think about that scenario?
Um, there's criteria that needs to be matched, right? There needs to be criteria that's met for me to invest in something. Um, Typical stuff, like it's really nothing special. Is it within something that can catch on within like the next few weeks, month? If it's a long term hold, is there a good team behind it? Is it have they got good marketing, good fundamentals? Really like pretty pretty standard stuff. Um,
And therefore, I
the
guess
thing
to add to that, what part of that do you feel like your edge is in? Basically, like which part of trading do you feel like your edge is in? Like, what's your strength, your biggest strength, and your biggest weakness?
definitely understanding what where the rotation is going to be is the I'm not going to say that's my strength, but that's the most important thing, right? If you look at like Mubi, for example, it was pretty clear that BRC20 uh, narrative is gonna have a run. There were so many plays that were pretty undervalued. It was unexpected as to how big that one would be. Um, but it was clear. You could see it within the first few weeks of these projects kind of blowing up. Um, in terms of yeah, so it's really having that high conviction early.
Out of interest, just quickly, on touching on Mubi, it's obviously pulled back a lot since it was in, max hype mode, and obviously now coming into like the BTC ETF. Like, how do you see Mubi and maybe other like BRC20 type tokens maybe doing off of that, right? Because there's an issue with a lot of these coins like Mubi that run
Yeah,
up crazily, which is that they tend to do these crazy Eiffel Towers where they run up and they fall
yeah,
just as hard as they did. And so it's like, how do you know if you're buying a pullback that's going to be continuing on, or if you're now just buying effectively a narrative that everyone's faded and everyone's
yeah.
moved on?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? So it's I don't buy anything that's pumped over like 100% in a day. I mean, I don't think I very rarely think people do that. It's you need to obviously control your emotions, but I think BRC20 is definitely going to have a run after ETF approval. There's a project called Alex, which is on my radar. Obviously, Map, BSSB, Movie. There's another one called Perp, which is coming out. Tonka did the TGE today. So there's a bunch of opportunity there. I think it's going to be a really hype narrative after ETF approval.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way personally, like, and I've kind of allocated myself for that. So let's hope that goes well. And we've spoken a lot about like between ourselves over message in terms of like how we think the ETF is going to go, and I think a lot of it is priced in, and it will obviously do well long term. And whether we see it approving and a big wick up followed by a sell off, or kind of vice versa, who knows? I
Yeah.
wanted to touch in terms of like speaking about edge, speaking about like how to identify these things. Are there any qualities you've seen in, obviously I know you're around people like Medoji and stuff on the orderly team who are pretty, seemingly at least across crypto Twitter, successful narrative traders and rotators. Like, are there any qualities specifically in them that you feel like you see that leads to their success, whether that be like psychological traits or more so like them able to make certain connections that get them information early? Like, what are the, at least from your perspective, the main things that you see?
It's definitely the latter. Um, like these guys on day trading, right? They're not trading using TA. Um, they're not like scalping or swing trading. It's very heavy. These guys trade heavily on narrative, right? Establish what narrative is going to be up next, and then just buy heavy within the best projects within that space. Um, really, and with that comes research, right? Like to be able to establish what that is, you need to be able to be a really good researcher, be very analytical, not necessarily just like drawing lines on a chart. These guys are obviously also well connected. They have very small groups where they um, internally share research, discuss about what narrative is going to be next, and then they all have reach. They all pretty much have a decent, very very good reach, and then you can push these narratives if you're very confident in it within your socials, and then retail tends to just catch on and right. But it's typical. Um, Yeah, it's definitely a mixture of both. But I think having these inner circles, being connected with a lot of the other really good researchers is super important.
Yeah, for sure. I think like shifting on from there, like speaking about like the people you know at Audley, like just like I kind of know what Audley is. Like, if you want to give like a quick brief intro about it, you're more than welcome. But the main kind of question I wanted to ask you about it is obviously going from being on a huge team at Polygon, right? Like, that's where you used to be, it's where you used to work, being on the BD team there. Going from being in a big team there, how have things changed going to? I don't know the exact size of the Audley team, but I would imagine it's much smaller than Polygon, right? How do you feel like
Yeah.
that shift has been for you, and kind of, obviously I'm not going to ask you necessarily if it's better or worse, and to, ask you if things are orderly are good or bad compared to Polygon, but like, how has your experience changed being in a really fucking big and public crypto company to being in a more small and B2B one like Orderly?
Yeah, it's definitely different. Polygon is pretty corporate. By the time I joined, there was about 600 people. So it was really bloated.
600, Jesus Christ.
It was pretty bloated. I think the competitors like have around about 300, 250 people. Um, Solana probably had an even smaller team. Um, and so it was very corporate by the time I joined. I joined early 2020, early 2022. Um, but it was good. It was like my first BD job in the space. Um, a lot of company benefits. Work culture was really good. Um, it was just generally a more hand off, definitely less flat company to be at. There was a obvious company structure. Um, there was opportunity to do more, but it wasn't as much as in a smaller company like Audley. Audley, there's about 48 people, I think our head count is right now. And that's also like pretty big for a project um, within a bear market, right? Um, I think the thing with Polygon was that they needed that amount of people to close the amount of partnerships that they did. Like myself alone, I closed 211 months, and we had about 20 to 30 different BDs across all the sectors, right?
You broke the record. I remember you telling me, right?
Yeah, for one of the months, I was the highest. I think I onboarded about 80 projects in a month. But I was like peak Polygon, like Polygon hype, and they needed you. You kind of need that many people to be able to have that impact. And then, of course, once they got to pretty much the top, um, they started. I don't know if you saw in the news at the time, but they
Yeah, they were
started.
laying people off, right? Because it's just not sustainable, right? And I guess it's interesting to think like, you've been at Orderly now majority through like a lot of the bear market, right? And so being in a more kind of like building mentality and all that kind of stuff is probably very different, right?
It's way more flat. There are other benefits. Like you don't get the typical like corporate benefits you get in a bigger company, like uh, like your typical like private healthcare or like a pension match or whatever. But it definitely makes up for it in other ways. In terms of personal development, there's a lot more focus. Um, my boss, the COO, is really, really good into um, helping with personal development. Um, Also, there's a bunch of traders obviously naturally working at a trading infra company. So you get a lot more alpha, and also um, it's way more flat. As a person who's come in as a BD manager, um, you definitely have way more opportunity than you would if you're a BD manager anywhere else, at like a bigger company, for example.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's a very good thing, and like I'm sure people, I can put it in the show notes or something. People can go check out Orderly, but it's like TLDR. It's basically like building the DEX order book infrastructure so that anyone can basically launch their own DEX and have access to Orderly's like liquidity and kind of all that kind of stuff, and support a ton of pairs and all that stuff off the bat. So like the question we
Right.
spoke about yesterday, and I wanted to get your opinion on now is like within like the Perp DEX space, like how do you see that evolving, right? Because Orderly obviously works with Ref, you guys work with Woo. But there's a gazillion different dexes, and I was looking today at the market share of GMX, and it's still like above like 50%. And actually, the part that's more interesting is that the market share of the fees within the DEX market, that's where GMX actually has the biggest market share. They have like an 80% market share of the fees, and the reason for that is because obviously they're not actually fundamentally probably the best perp DEX, and if anything, their fees are really high. How do you kind of see the market share shifting in that over time? Like, is it going to drift towards the ones that are actually better products and fundamentals, or is it going to remain like where the first movers are, where the branding is king, and maybe the money is there and rife to spend on marketing? Just how do you generally see the perp DEX competition shaping out over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so if we look at GMX, um, yeah, you're right. They dominate when it comes to revenue. They definitely generate the most revenue. Or they're up there, right? They're at least top two, top three. They also have way higher fees than a lot of the competitors. But why are they winning? It's pretty simple. It's community, and the ability for user acquisition, right? They were one of the first movers, which is a big advantage. People tend to pick one DEX and then stick with it. So when it comes to like new players coming to the space, I know, um, you were mentioning HMX the other day. Yes, in the short term, they can bring people over, right? Incentives, like liquidity incentives, are definitely important. Um, but you need to be able to retain those users after the yield goes away. Um, and so, like I said, bolstering your community, acquiring a really, really strong community, um, and keeping those users that you've acquired is super important. And you tend to do that with UX, right? Like UX is pretty much the only thing that people like. That's the only reason why people return to the decks that they want to trade on. And GMX has obviously done that really well. Uh, the users they'll go to other dexes, other product dexes for the incentives, and then they'll go back.
Yeah, I've been reading into this a lot recently, and actually, I agree with you on the UI UX side. But I would add, I was speaking with a VC today, and they kind of were speaking to me about. I was speaking about the fact that obviously OpenSea went from having 100% market share to then Blur taking 80% of it in the space of like a year or two, right? And like they seem to believe and made a good argument, and I agree with them that the reason for that actually is to do with like the network effects. So the fact that OpenSea obviously didn't have a token and didn't set up anything to basically have their user base invest further within the brand and within the project and in terms of using it, whereas Blur obviously brought in the token, they brought in an entire ecosystem around that and then created loads of network effects. And you've seen how they are trying to do that further, whereby now they're launching Blast, the new L2. And so actually with all of this stuff, it kind of comes down to like how you branch out. And I've been building some tokenomics right now, and one of the things I realized was, especially when you're a more B2B project, right? Like, and this is going to be super valuable from the perspective of someone like Orderly, is that you can only keep users through incentives for so long. And you see this with all the airdrops, and users come in, they farm it, and then they leave, right? And so you need to find a way to, when you get to that max point where you have the most users that have come in as a result of the incentive, you need to, at that exact point, or as soon or as close to it as you can, you need to switch on some sort of mechanism, other incentive or some other product or something that basically turns those token holders that are doing nothing else apart from holding the token as a result of trying to make money, but turn them into users somehow, whether that be like through governance and other things, or more creative and more actually useful and practical things. But yeah, I definitely think that space is going to shape out a lot, and I would hope that the better products win out, and they probably will over the long term. But I think with the incentives of large investors and them pushing the products that they're most invested in, things like GMX are probably still going to do well for a long time. And at the end of the day, because people are lazy, they're going to use things like GMX even if it has poorer fees, right? But yeah, something to kind of like take onto from there is, hang on, I just get up the questions, is in terms of thinking about like what wins out in crypto, right? Like not just the which perp dex is going to win out, but like which niche, like which tech, like what do you actually think is functional and useful like long term in crypto? Like what's legit, what's not, what's vaporware, what's not? Like how do you kind of think about that maybe in terms of your your long-term bags, or maybe you're actually more so investing for just what you think is going to do well in the market. But speaking about what's more functional, how do you think about
Um, First of all, gaming. I think is going to be the first wave of retail users coming in. When it comes to retail, they don't tend to buy stuff that they don't understand, and gaming is really easy to get, right? So I think that's definitely a good one. There is a lot of shit in there, but when it comes to the more established tier 1, tier 2 projects, I've no doubt that they'll do really well next cycle and that they'll stick around. If you look at like Shrapnel or Gunzilla, like these guys are pretty undervalued in my opinion. They'll do really well, and they're actually building very decent looking AAA stuff on chain. Um, and of course, the use case they're bringing in NFTs, ownership of your digital assets, etc., etc. So there's a pretty clear sector that I think will do really well and will have longevity. Another one I'm big on RWA and AI. I think this year we'll definitely see a really strong coupling of AI and Web3 coming together. I think it makes a lot of sense. Um, Oracles definitely are a good play. Um,
that? Yeah, what do you think
I like
about? What do you think about? Do you know much about POCT? POKT?
Yeah, I know some of the team. I know they're doing like the deep and stuff, right? But I'm not super knowledgeable on it. But I've seen a lot of stuff on my Twitter feed, on
Yeah,
my
yeah,
on
of
my
course.
Twitter feed, probably.
Thinking about like what's going to do well next cycle, right? I mean, like at the end of the day, we're here to make money, we're here to trade well, right? And it doesn't matter what's going to do well if you buy the right things and don't actually take profit at the right time and end up round tripping all of it. Like,
Yeah,
how are you thinking about taking profit? And the reality is, and I was speaking to OX Kun about this today, but like, if you are greedy and try to sell the top, you inevitably you will almost always fail, right? So like, do you have a plan for how you're going to kind of sell the top and or at least as close to it as you can, as perfectly as you can?
yeah,
Just how are you thinking about that, basically?
yeah. I think it's like I think someone did a statistics on how like the percentage of people that actually sell the top, and it's
Oh, it's
obviously
crazy.
tiny.
Yeah, you got to think of the
It's
bell curve, right? Like you got to think of the bell curve. Only so many people actually right there on the precipice, like selling the top. Like only a fraction of that liquidity right at the top is actually selling the fucking
it's
top.
it's a fraction of a percentage of like 1 percentile. It's really small, um, and it's just a stupid thing, in my opinion, to aim for, right? I sell in like okay, when it came like for example like my movie trade a few weeks back, like I sold half my bag pretty early at like a 60% pump. I sold half my bag, and then it ended up pumping about 400-500%. It was around 400%, and I pretty much caught like the last bit of my bag, like maybe 10-15% from the top. So I sell a big chunk of it, and this is just my strategy. It might change like in the coming weeks, months. My strategy right now is to take a majority of my profit on a decent pump, like something around 2x, and then slowly sell decent clips of the remaining bag on like the big, you know, parabolic pumps that happen days or weeks after. Um, of course, it's not the most profitable way, but it's pretty safe. I get out most of my initial investment and some very early, and then I have no issue, pretty much no emotion either when it comes to trading the rest of the bag, because I'm risk free. So it's like typical stuff that people tell you to do, but most people don't do. And so it's really done pretty well for me over the last few months.
Yeah, no, I
Of
think that's
course,
well said. Go on, go on.
yeah, within my like first few years of trading, I was that guy like trying to snipe launches, buying tops and then perfectly selling bottoms. It was like absolute carnage. And thankfully, like everyone goes through that, right? Everyone goes through that phase when they first like join the space. Um, but it's definitely not recommended. Like you'll never catch a bottom and sell the top perfectly. If anything, you're pretty likely to do the opposite. When you
Yeah,
see pumps,
that's what Kun was telling me as well today. He was like, most of the time, if you try to perfectly buy the bottom and sell the top, you actually end up doing the exact opposite.
just
And that
you do
trying to do it is the same thing effectively, in the sense that it's just like pure greed. It's like the only thing it is.
yeah, exactly. So my three rules is aggressively take profit on the initial pump. Sell clips within these like future coming pumps, and also just don't like don't get butthurt, don't overthink it when you kind of mess it up. Like there's really no point dwelling on oh I missed out on 50K profit because I sold early, or just be happy with what you have and just make sure you aggressively take profits.
No, I think that's really good advice for pretty much anyone at any level. Like, and yeah, there's a lot of things you hear, and unfortunately, you don't internalize it. You don't actually take it on board. You don't have enough of a plan. You don't effectively hedge for your own stupidity in the future, whereby you need to actually account for how you're going to feel at the top. And you know, I heard well put was almost like having a plan is somewhat time based or multiple based in terms of your profits. And just ruthlessly sticking to that and aggressively taking profits. So yeah, thank you for saying that. I think that's well put.
You can also have your long term bags as well, right? That you just do not worry about at all. We have like a 2 year window until we probably top. Um, have that long term bag that you just don't touch as well, and you can just keep that there. When you're trading with your smaller bags, that's fine. Use that strategy, but also have something where you have a high conviction plays. Just buy them at home, and then when you feel that peak euphoria, I'm sure a lot of people remember it from the last April. Then you can start aggressively taking profits. You don't need to be necessarily trading within like a few days or a few weeks window.
Hell yeah. I think that's a really good kind of place to leave it. I think we spoke about a lot of things, and let's keep this kind of short and sweet. But like just to wrap it up, I guess like, you know, what's like a typical day in the life for you? And you know, what are some of like the main kind of things you're doing that you think, what's kind of like the 80/20s of your day? You know what I mean? What are the things you do that you feel like are bringing you the most success?
Bro, I spend a lot of time at the moment. I think it's going to be the same for a lot of people over the last few years in front of my computer. Like I get up, check the chart, um, take my vitamins, and I eat pretty late. But yeah, there's nothing really like I'm not going to tell you that I wake up at 4 a.m. and just meditate and then go to the gym or whatever. But
Wait, you don't do that?
definitely not. But definitely good to. I'm trying to keep active while I'm doing this because I'm spending so much time in front of the computer. Definitely get like a gym workout in every. Try and go for a run. Try and be offline too. It's super important. Like take a day off here and there, and like just forget about crypto. Uh, and yeah, it's a pretty standard day. I wake up well 9 a.m. like everyone else, and then work throughout the day. It's pretty standard.
Hell yeah. And I guess just last thing is, you know, is there anything you want to say or anyone you recommend I try to get on, or things you want to say to people? Like I give you a bit of a platform to say whatever you want pretty much.
I appreciate you having me on. Can definitely make introductions if there are any people that you want to get on the show. Would highly recommend having Dojo on. I'm sure he wouldn't mind.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you having me on, man. It's been a really good time.
Hell yeah, yeah. First and mainly, I hope anyone listening got some value from it. I'll take some notes and I'll kind of put them down and condense it, turn it into a little thread, and cover some clips and stuff like that, and hopefully it should be good. But yeah, thank you very much for coming on, and I hope that people listening enjoyed.
Cheers, mate.
Awesome. All right. Hell yeah. All right. Sick. Let's leave it there then. Fuck yeah.